He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Welcome to Cryptid Clues, everybody. I'm your host, Reuben Olson, joined by your other also host, Taylor Field. Today's episode dives headfirst into a dog-eat-dog world because I had hot dogs for dinner and we're going to be discussing less hot werewolf dogs tonight, unless, of course, they come straight out of Twilight. If you want to see what other content we have, head on over to CryptidClues.ca. Ask us questions over at our email, cryptidclues@gmail.com. And if you like what you hear, support us on Patreon for $1 or more for ad-free exclusive content and some D&D episodes as well at patreon.com/CryptidClues. Finally, you can find us on almost all social media. Taylor, back to you.
I never know what I'm gonna be listening to when you do your intros. I love it. It's just such a cool little tangent.
I'm watching you just burst out laughing this entire time.
I can't ruin the flow. I can't laugh or anything. Oh, it's so good.
You'd be allowed to. It'd be kind of interesting to have you laughing just in the middle of the intro.
Oh, but I mean, you said it though, Reuben. Yes, we're here to talk Dogman again. Now, it's been some time since our last Dogman-centric episode, titled The Dogman Deep Dive, which is episode 36 for the listeners. But in that episode, we spoke about wolf intelligence, the physique, and other Dogman facts, kind of in reference to wolves. Overall, we just skimmed only the surface of that, with even a brief mention of werewolves. Now, I sort of thought to start us off, we could recap on that specific thing of the bone popping. This is something you mentioned in that episode of the Dogman Deep Dive, Reuben.
Yes, I did. And I was just trying to crack my knuckles unsuccessfully for the effect. So it was just absolute silence on my end. I apologize. But bone popping is something that's often reported with Dogman encounters. And that bone popping could be indicative of them shifting from a quadrupedal form to a bipedal one, as is often the case when the sound is heard. Or essentially, when they're doing that shift, that's where the sockets in their joints pop out to allow for this difference in movement, which makes sense to me. Also, the gas bubbles kind of compressing and popping, like when you crack your knuckles, is what's responsible primarily for that sound. But to add something new to the bone popping theory, the sound could also be attributed to lung room, because a ribcage in a quadruped restricts their breathing when they stretch out vertically against gravity. So a shift in the ribcage is also necessary, not just in the hips for movement, but to accommodate for a difference in air intake.
So the shift in their chest is the result of them shifting forms from bipedal to quad stance, or from
quadrupedal to bipedal.
Quadrupedal, okay. And they would have to shift that back then, right, when they revert to their other stance?
Nope. In reports, actually, when they go back down on all fours, the bone popping isn't heard as much. So it's something that they could just go back into later. Kind of like if you went down on all fours, you could walk about awkwardly. But if you were to shift back, you would be much better at it, right?
Right.
But if you're a quadruped and you just try to stand up and run around, it's much harder to do it that way than the other.
I love this because it reminds me so much of just that werewolf human transformation, when you have the sound of the just poppingness, and that's just the result of the body changing to adapt to its new stance. Again, like how you say, it's this transition between the bipedal quadruped form here, and
the sound of Taylor cutting into a mid-break here as we accidentally goofed up the first part of the notes.
Is that obvious? But on that note of just having this episode focusing on Dogman, we are going to be talking about Dogman, of course, but the Werewolf Association is more so just what people were seeing back then. People may not have been able to label it properly and just kind of be like, oh, that's a Dogman or that's this or that. And they could just associate it with just this well-versed term being a werewolf.
Exactly.
Yeah. Speaking to that, on this note of man to wolf, transformation, Dogman, it's speculated, however, that the earliest and first example of this is recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh from around 2100 years before Christ. To be specific, this tale is that of a selfish reign of King Gilgamesh and how the gods created a companion for him called Enkidu. And this was in order to basically humble and balance the king. Enkidu is suspected of being the first werewolf. The story says that Aruru, goddess of creation, also of the earth and fertility, created Enkidu from a pinch of clay, and that he was born a man, completely covered in flowing hair, running with the wild beasts of the mountains and forests. In times since, he has been referenced as the god of the animals, the saint of wild beasts, and the cast of a natural man. Now, I believe that we have mentioned Enkidu before in previous episodes. I can't remember which specific one.
And primarily centered towards Enkidu also possibly being a Bigfoot as well.
Right. It's probably the medieval Wildman episode then that we talked about it, I bet. Yeah. So when you start to dive a little deeper into this, you realize things do start to go awry. The papyrus drawings, stonewall carvings that were discovered seem to yield Enkidu not so much as a wolf. And this would lead into how we have that Bigfoot association, but more so in some cases with hooves, horns, or a tail. In one description, almost reminiscent of a baboon, which is very interesting. The scriptures also detail how Enkidu wandered with wild cattle as opposed to wolves. Jumping in time a little bit, we can visit Greek mythology with the legend of Lycaon. It's not spelled like I don't think like how Lycaon is supposed to be. Not supposed to be, but normally spelled Lycaon, which makes me think that there's like a little bit more of like a gap in there, like Lycaon.
This is the pronunciation thing again.
I know.
Every episode
I've always referred to it as lichen, or
make a drinking game out of it.
Yeah, take a shot every time I mess up a word. According to legend, though, Lycaon was the son of Pelasgus and had unfortunately angered the god Zeus. It's a very brutal story about what this individual was trying to do to fool Zeus, trying to get him to eat children, I believe it was. At least eat human flesh was the main thing. So as punishment, Zeus turned Lycaon and his children all into wolves. Now, this just continues on throughout all these different eras, because once we in Nordic folklore, we see werewolves emerging in specific parts of that early kind of lore. So this is a recurring thing throughout our existence. During an extended time without the internet and worldwide communication, all these cultures have witnessed in some shape or form or created their own variant werewolf dogman ideologies, which I think is fascinating.
And is it just in the Greek one that we have reports of them eating children, or is that in others as well?
Sorry. I'll specify that a bit more. So with that specific legend, Lycaon being the son of Pelasgus, now they had set up I don't want to say like a prank, but their goal was to torment Zeus, and they tried to trick him into eating the flesh of children.
Oh, they tried to trick Zeus into that.
Yes, and so Zeus...
Which seems to imply that they might be into eating that as well.
Exactly, you could take that into account. Zeus was not fooled, however, and he got really angry and punished them. So that's why Lycaon and his children all became wolves. Now, I'm glad Zeus called them out on it and didn't eat any kids. That's not good.
Well, it's just interesting that was brought up, because it made me think of Little Red Riding Hood and the whole like wolf grandma trying to eat her.
Oh yeah.
And then I actually have a report for later that has a threat of eating children as well in it.
No kidding. I look forward to that. I don't think I have any. Oh, actually, no. I do have something else associated with a child and a possible werewolf dogman, but that is probably leading up towards your encounter. But before we get into that, moving through the ages here, once we hit that 16th and 17th century, werewolf accusations, they start to run rampant, especially in Europe. Now this, along with witchcraft accusations leading to immoral executions, like people were just getting bopped left, right, and center. It was not a good time in humanity. There's ever a time that we needed lawyers. This was the time we needed lawyers.
Imagine those poor people way back when, if they could hear this podcast and just being referred to as getting bopped.
Is that a politically incorrect term?
No, it's funny
Oh,
that we've just decided to use that word.
I didn't know what other. I didn't want to be rude and say just executed or like.
Well, that's
killed
more
off.
accurate. It's more accurate to say someone was executed than bopped. I mean, it just sounds like you're sweeping it under the rug, you know?
Yeah, that's true. We don't want to
But
sweep it under the rug. It was a
It's
dark
far
point of
enough
humanity.
back in history that we can almost make fun of it now and get away with it. But if it was something more recent, imagine using the word bopped.
Oh, I wouldn't. I would be very politically correct because you have to be very careful with words, again, as I butcher most of my pronunciations because I'm Lycaon. It's a tricky word. I think Google would get that one wrong, just like we did that test in the previous news episode that we did. However, I digress. You know what? Out of respect for them, I'm not going to say bopped. Bopped is my default kind of word at times. I'm going to say executed and morally executed. Now, humans for the most part have been pretty stupid. I'll add this in for sure. Like, okay, yes, we are super smart. I was driving down the road and I saw these beautiful new buildings that were constructed in town. I thought, okay, like we're pretty dang crafty at what we can construct here. That's an amazing result of intelligence. But you go back 500 years, we're not the brightest bulb in the box. So when a random wild wolf kills some people,
When it
our
bops
thought
somebody?
back then, it bops. Yeah, it bops some people. Our thought back then was werewolf. Now, I just wanted to put that out there as like devil's advocate, basically. But at first, it may or may not be the most true case. Like people are suspecting like, oh, it could be werewolf, but it's possible that some of these situations were indeed something more. And that's where I hope I'm making sense as I kind of segue this into the first story of the Beast of Gavaden. That's what I'm going to be getting into here.
How many people does the Beast of Gavaden bop? Oh, goodness. Now I'm messing up the pronunciation. You're the one with the notes and that guide in front of you. I'm just reacting.
Well, there
getting bopped here.
I'm getting bopped. Back in the 18th century, because I'll lead into it here, it was between 1765 and 1767 that this unknown creature killed over 100 people in the rural region of France. Currently, it is now called Lozère, and this province was formerly known as Gavaden, and it just was consistently terrorized by this creature at this point in time. Now, its first sighting was made by a woman tending to her cattle in a forest close to Lagon in June. Her bulls managed to protect her. They just scared off the creature, basically. However, unfortunately, shortly after this encounter, the creature managed to find and kill a 14-year-old girl. The following months resulted in increased sightings and even more attacks. Sorry, you looked like you were going to whisper something there.
No, I'm trying to keep things correct now. I was going to use the word bop again because it's tempting. Can we subside the beast if we just give it a bop it? Is that enough? You can play bop it for a while?
I haven't played with a bop it in a long time. It's been a good minute. Maybe it'll work. I don't know. If it has the heightened intelligence to want to play with something like that. Bop it. Spin it. Smack it.
Screaming ensues.
So the creature's description was that of a large wolf with unusual coloring to its fur. This is the kicker for me. Primarily red with black streaks flowing on it. I've never seen a wolf like that before in my life. In tons of National Geographic photographs, anything online, videos. I've never seen anything like that.
No, and one thing from the Werewolf Dogman connection there is the one thing they say as well, which is it's time for an ad break. Welcome back, everybody. Ooh, that was a saucy one.
That was very good. So
It was very forced.
moving on from there, according to a published study by the Norwegian Institute of National Research, there were 210 actual attacks total, of which 113 were fatal. This got so bad in 1765 that King Louis XV actually stated that the French state would provide aid to kill this creature. Now, with professional wolf hunters being selected, there were some that did have difficulties trying to find and kill it. There's a man specifically named Francois Antoine who was commissioned and successfully killed 3 giant gray wolves, but the attacks continued. Now we move along into 1967, June 19th, when a local hunter by the name of Jean Chastel shot a wolf and all of a sudden the attack stopped. That was it. The speculation is that the beast was not a singular wolf, but a group of them. Many individual wolves that attacked. So there are two outcomes to this, the way I see it. Firstly, maybe, yes, they did kill the wolf or the right group of wolves, and finally people stopped being attacked by whatever this thing was. Maybe it was formerly human or a dogman. This is the other alternative route here. If it was one of those things, maybe it just got savvy and backed off. So we either did kill a bunch of wolves or the wolf that was doing this, or this thing was something more along the lines of a cryptid, and it just thought, okay, they're getting wise, they're killing wolves left, right, and center, I'm going to back off. So I think that
that's what I was thinking when you were saying that. If I was a dogman or a werewolf and I saw people going around hunting wolves and killing them, I'd be like, whoa, yikes, they're coming for me. Let's back off for a few centuries.
I feel like you can attribute that to many other cryptids like Sasquatch, because I think a Sasquatch has that level of intelligence where they can see and understand that when a hunter is walking around the woods, they know what a gun is. They're very aware. And dogmen are too. There's been instances where they recognize that this thing is dangerous and a weapon. And while it may not have a lethal effect on this creature, they're still very savvy and aware of it.
Yeah, that brings me back to the report I brought up a couple times now, where the hunter's in the tree while his wife and family are packing up a tent or whatever, and he sees a dogman come along and a Sasquatch together, just to make that encounter more exciting. And he ends up pointing like a stick or something at it, as if he's holding a rifle, and it stops and backs off.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. And it makes me wonder, okay, are these things living a very prolonged life, or how are they being taught this? Because if something is born out in the wild, doesn't have any human contact, and all of a sudden they come across this hunter with a gun, like, how do they know? Is it something that's just like a genetic memory passed along? Is it something that they're instructed by their parents, their parent dogmen, like dogwomen?
If they're intelligent and they have a language and stuff, I would imagine, yes, that would be something that they're very aware of.
Just communicate it amongst each other. Yeah, that makes sense. So according, however, to historian Jean-Marc Mauricio, around 7,600 people were killed by wolves in France between 1362 and 1918. That is insane. That is a lot of people. Oh my goodness.
That's a lot of people to wolf down. Holy.
Yeah. I mean, that being said, like, of course it is over the span of 600 years, but that's a lot of deaths. That is a lot of deaths. Now,
can you hear the cats in the background? They're adding some special effects to this episode.
I don't
attract some dogmen.
Yeah, I don't hear the cats, so we're all good there.
Oh, thank goodness.
But getting back to dogman specifically, so we talked about the bone popping noise that some people hear when it alters its stance. Now, this creature, again, description-wise, is reportedly standing at 7 feet tall whilst on its hind legs, clocks in between 400 and 500 pounds. Now, classic Michigan, and I say classic because they got some wild things going on down there.
Like the Michigan Dogman.
Exactly, you said it. The reports of dogman have been tracked back to as far as 1794. We know this via the journal of a French fur trader who described it as loup-garou, which is French for werewolf. Pennsylvania, I learned, also has some werewolf dogman history to it. There's a local legend actually from 1899 of a hunter shooting a wolf, and when he approached the body after following the blood trail, discovered a man lying dead of a gunshot wound, which is very, very interesting. So what do you think the kicker is here, Reuben? Are we dealing with a werewolf, dogman, or both? I've seen people discuss these differences, and they've kind of narrowed it down to something pretty basic, that they're separate. Dogman exists and werewolves do not. So what do you think?
I mean, it's very hard to decide without any proof, right? You have to keep an open mind, and I'm the kind of person who accepts all the possibilities at once until something's proven. So if Dogman exists and werewolves exist, they could be separate entities, or they could be one and the same thing. Perhaps if somebody gets shot and they want to transform and try and escape or whatever, you'd have a body lying in the woods that's a human that was originally a werewolf-like creature when it got shot. Could have been a person with a wolf mask and they threw it off running away because they were shot and in pain, and the mask was never found. You know, the list of possibilities is endless, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of closing to my notes here. I got one last thing and I'm going to touch upon, and it's the feeling is what I titled it. This is always something that gets me.
Well, speaking of the feeling, I have the felines over here going nuts. I'm so happy you can't hear them.
I don't hear them meowing at all. Wouldn't be a bad thing if they did, you know, a little extra ambiance into the episode for
some ambiance that attracts the dogmen.
Yeah, exactly.
Some bait.
The feeling though, this is something that always gets me. It always makes the hair stand up on my neck when I'm looking into this sort of stuff. But I just wanted to reiterate onto the show here because I think we've talked about it in the past. The invasive feeling people get when they see a dogman, and that reciprocated feeling or visualization of a dogman towards these people, whether it be that terrifying smile or just their sincere obsession with this person that stumbles across their path. Like, we're dealing with a Bigfoot are rare, dogmen are even rarer. And so if you are lucky enough or unlucky enough to come into the presence of one, it's like they're fixated on this, like, oh, wow, this wasn't supposed to happen, but I'm very interested that this person managed to locate me and see me out in the open. So in most cases, it's usually this same scenario. Someone is out in the woods. Let's say for a hunter, and this is going to stem into an actual scenario here, but start us off here, there's a hunter in the woods, tree stand and all that, open viewing ahead of them, and way off in the distance, maybe they see something walk around, they scope in on it, and it appears to be, to them, a massive wolf or coyote, on all fours, of course. They line up maybe to take the shot, maybe not, they're still watching through their scope. All of a sudden, either way, this thing eventually stops, stands up on its hind legs, and will lock eyes with the hunter. Now, this is where there is like an aggressive or satisfied mindset to these creatures in stalking their prey, like I referenced before. And the account that I read of a hunter being in this situation, he actually shot at one. It dropped back down to all fours and just stared at him and then stood back up. And then it started walking and continued its approach directly, beelining it for the hunter. The hunter, he got the heck out of there. He got on his ATV and he left the area to eventually return home as quickly as he could. It's worth noting that this property was his family's hunting property. The next day when he was at home, his home was like farmland and stuff like that, and a ways away from this family's hunting property, he looks out the window and he sees a dogman standing on his property in the field, just standing completely still, watching the home.
That's super creepy, and I hate that very much.
Yeah. Now, I know I've read people talking about where they've seen a Sasquatch and maybe things went a little bit awry and they got the heck out of there. They beelined it and they went home, and then all of a sudden they start hearing the noises and they start seeing the footprints and things start going sideways around their property. And I wouldn't put it past a dogman either. Like I said, I think that more so than Bigfoot, where Bigfoot might do it for revenge, if you shoot or piss one off, within reason, they'll track you. I would suspect, again, my own personal belief, with a dogman, it's some fixation like with dogmen and cars. They have something with cars that they just like to press their faces up, even against windows too. It's weird. It's like peanut butter and jam for them, I'd say.
Yeah, and going back to the feeling, I think it's very strange that people have a feeling they get with dogman that's not so often reported with Bigfoot in such a sense too. Like some people get a feeling, oh, this Bigfoot thing's terrifying, it's scary, and I don't like it. But with dogman, it's very unique, and I think that could be due to the very commonly reported telepathic communication in a sense. And it's almost like this sense that the dogman, it's not talking to you, but you can understand its intentions because it's staring so intently at you. The smile of the dogman, the feeling of, oh, this thing's more powerful than me. It could take me if it wanted to. That connection is different than seeing a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, because you're still left with this mystery and wonder. But with a dogman, you're just like intense, like this isn't supposed to be happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any more on my notes, so I'm happy to pass the torch on to you if you want to continue.
Oh, absolutely. Right after this ad break. Welcome back, everybody. So before we close out of the episode, I have one very fun report to make. And as fun as the report is, it also comes with a little bit of sadness, because I'd like to, while discussing the Werewolf Dogman connection, I'd like to make a little blurb here about a very wonderful author who has just recently passed. Linda S. Godfrey was known for bringing the Dogman to light in her research over the past years and publishing many, many reports in her books. She single-handedly put the Beast of Bray Road on the map and made topics like this almost as popular as the legendary Bigfoot itself. But just in the past 2 weeks that we started filming this, she has passed away, which is very unfortunate because I believe when we did the Ron Moorhead interview, I made a comment afterwards to you, Taylor, that Linda Godfrey is somebody I would love for us to interview eventually.
That's really, really unfortunate.
I have her books, though, and she's a very good author. And in her book, Monsters Among Us, Linda compiles a metric ton of Dogman encounters, among other things. And her perspective is very, very unique and also very good. She's open-minded. She accepts all the possibilities. She alone stands divided with the idea that until we have proof, a Dogman could be anything. A Bigfoot could be anything. The looking into portals, tracks disappearing, all that stuff, it could be anything. So she really does tackle it from different angles, and she presents all the possibilities in her books, along with these reports. And for each report that she makes, she just presents the report as is. This is what the witness said to me. This is what I confirmed. I feel like this witness isn't lying. And if they're not lying, how could this be true? Right? It's a very, very good approach that she has to these. And several of her theories on Dogman and such, beyond flesh and blood animals, is a couple of theories that bleed right into the werewolf topic. One possibility we have with the werewolf connection stems all the way from witchcraft to humans with planned or unfortunate encounters with the supernatural, and all the way down to the interdimensional shape-shifting beings that could take on human or wolf-like forms. So to end the episode, I'd like to condense a section of her book that reports this transformation effect. In Linda's book, there is a section titled The Torrance Werewolf. For the sake of privacy, she has excluded the witnesses' names to a certain extent, and this event happened when the witnesses were 7 and 13 at a laundromat with their mother, who had just bought them their first Nerf ball to play with. You remember Nerf stuff? They still sell Nerf guns everywhere. Nerf balls aren't as popular anymore. When I was a kid, you go to the store, Nerf balls, it was like, oh, what's this cool looking ball? It's super squishy, very durable. So these kids, they were excited to play. And of course, they're being dragged to the laundromat. So they begged mom to play in the parking lot. And while she said no at first because of traffic and stuff, they convinced her to let them play with a Nerf ball at the adjacent apartment complex, which was right next door, very visible out the laundromat windows and such. And they convinced her to let them play with the Nerf ball in the area because, well, it's not in the road, and it's a big empty parking lot with very sheltered, walled-in car parking areas. So they proceeded to play ball in the parking stalls, which were little carports that had been walled in, after bouncing the Nerf ball off the wall for a solid 30 minutes, which is a long time to be playing. But of course, laundromats back then weren't the greatest things in the world. There was a lot of waiting. The mom had stopped checking in on them as frequently. The 7-year-old, a little girl, had thrown the ball too high, and it went up over one of the walls and bounced down and into the storage compartment below the parking stall, which they could see through some of the grates there. So she decided to go around the wall and went after the ball. She went down into the storage compartment below and found a large grate in the ground that seemingly led to a dark, unknown underground area. She passed behind it and went to pick up the Nerf ball. So now she was back underneath that car stall, against a wall underneath, with the grate behind her, and the exit back up to the parking lot. To her surprise, as she turned around, the grate lifted up and was propped up on the back of a man with broad shoulders. She could see him clearly from the face down to the waist, where his body disappeared into the inky darkness below. As she had gone below to get this Nerf ball, she quickly realized that this grate was right between her and the exit, and this man was blocking her in with very little room to get around. This man could reach his arms out and potentially almost touch the sides of the walls. Because if you think about sitting in a car stall, cars aren't very wide. You sit in your seat and there's the passenger seat. If you were to sit right in the dead center of the console, you could probably touch both windows depending on how big your car is, right? So a car stall isn't going to be much bigger than the car itself. So this man was very out of place and complained to her about the noise the ball was making as they consistently beat it against the wall of this car stall. But as this man looked up and down, he became oddly excited at the discovery that this was just a small child playing above him. He then, creepily enough, called her by her first name, which had not been spoken out loud, as her and her brother very rarely called each other by their names. And they had just been playing ball quietly outside. The ball was the only thing making noise. And there was no indication that there was children giggling above.
And the brother is aware of where she is right now, correct?
Yes. Okay. I'll get to that pretty quick here. But the brother is aware of this and is a collaborative witness to this scenario. So the man, according to the girl, was very out of place and seemed to be in the wrong century. He had a European-styled outfit with velvety sleeves, a very pale complexion with long hair. He looked like he belonged out of a Dracula movie. And she does describe his appearance so pale that he also almost comes off as a vampire in a sense. So at this point, as she debated on running past him by slipping down the side, but hesitated due to the possibility of being reached, her brother comes rushing down to see what's lifting up this grate, because from above he could make out it looked like a person. As he goes down to see the back of the grate lifted up between her and his sister, between the man and his sister, I can't even English anymore right now, I apologize. As he goes down to see what's going on with his sister and see what's lifting up this grate, he can see the back of the grate lifted up with arms sticking out the sides. So he moves to a side where he can just make out the man's face. And that's important that he can see the man's face, because this man slowly becomes insistent on his sister going down the grate with him. And stretches his arm out to grab her and offer it. And at this point, she had made note that his voice was very frustrated at first, then became lilting and soft, trying to convince her to come down below. And he seemed to be unaware of the brother's presence. But as he came downstairs and saw him reach out, he raised his voice. And this seemed to make the man quite nervous. And at this point, he stops. And he begins to snap and get very angry and insistent with her to hurry up and come down with him. He then stops, mutters to himself that something is going wrong and he doesn't want to do this right now, and then transforms. His bones make snapping sounds and his eyes instantly turn yellow. His gums bleed as teeth grow out of his whole body. His gums bleed as teeth grow out of his mouth, and his whole body bursts.
Wow.
I skipped a line. So his gums bleed as teeth grow out of his mouth, and his whole body bursts out of his clothes and become covered in hair. He then screams very loudly and stops talking words to communicate and shifts to a more telepathic form of communication. The communication that the girl and brother receive is not so much words, but intent. And the intent they get is, you need to come down this grate with me right now, or I will eat the both of you and do terrible things to your bodies. So her brother is quite frightened, but has the courage to yell for her to run right now while he's transforming. So she does, and he reaches out to grab her by the ankle and successfully latches on. She struggles momentarily and manages to slip out, leaving the Nerf ball behind. They both run back to their mother, and their mother was greeted by two pale, sickly children that were fraught with fear. After the little girl explained everything that had happened, the mom, of course, thought they were crazy and just playing around, and then realized they didn't have their Nerf ball. They left it behind, and that was a new toy that they were excited for. She had just bought on it. Why is it not with them? They were so frightened. They didn't bother to pick it up or go back for it. And they didn't want her to go get it either. They wanted to go home. At this point, the little girl explained everything, and the mom wasn't believing it. So the brother chimed in and said, "No, Mom, I saw everything." And he was 11, so he's still a kid, still in the realm of, well, maybe they are just imagining something. Maybe they're just playing around. But that's when she notices that her pant leg is up, and she has marks around her leg as if something was squeezing her. So with that, they go back in the car, and they never go back to that laundromat again. Now, to this, not quite to this day, but up until a few years ago, her brother refused to talk about this incident. He wouldn't bring it up. He wouldn't defend her. He wouldn't make any mention to it. And if she brought up the story, he would walk away. It wasn't until after the girl's now husband, some kind of event happened. I didn't write this down in my notes. I believe he was passing away, or there was a funeral or something that they were attending, that the brother finally spoke up and said, I don't like to talk about what happened back then as kids, but I just want you to know that your memory is not wrong. There really was a creature there that attacked us, and I don't want to talk about it again.
That story gave me chills. Legit chills. Holy smokes.
Mm-hmm. Super freaky, eh?
Yeah. I'm very big on the reaffirmation when you go through these experiences and you have someone with you. You're either going to have two outcomes to this. You're going to have someone who is going to reaffirm you with that and be like, "Oh, did you see what we saw? Holy smokes!" Or you're going to have the other personality kick in where it's like, "Hey, I know what I saw, but I'm just going to be in total denial. I'm going to shut it out of my memory." And as that, I don't want to say as sad as that is, because it's human instinct. It's a thing that shouldn't exist. It's terrifying. And to see something like that, you want to put it out of sight, out of mind. You never want to think about it. So I don't come down hard on people that do that. But I will say, it is a shame, because that information that has died with so many people that held it in, and they have died and taken that with them to their grave. There'd be so much more information that maybe could have been put out there. Maybe even evidence that would be really credible and could be reaffirming to other people seeing the same things in these areas. Maybe this is not the first instance in this parking area, this grade, that this has happened. Obviously, this sounds like a den, something that he felt safe, this creature felt safe with accessing and knowing, okay, we just got to get down there, because once we're down there, we are hidden away, more reclusive, and out of sight.
What I find very interesting is the report that he looked out of place, like he wasn't in the proper time.
Are you thinking stepped in from a portal from another part of time, came in? He didn't seem too stressed out about his environment, or do you think he's just a very old, slow aging person that's just not caught up with the times yet for apparel?
I think for something as fantastical as a werewolf to exist, if it is aware that it can just pop in through other realities or timelines or whatever, he probably wouldn't care too much about the environment if he sees a tasty morsel in front of him. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'd like to bring up too is a lot of people refer to memory when it comes to a story like this. Maybe there was a man there. Maybe he had some frightening expression or appearance. But traumatic events are what stick with you most. And the memory that this witness shares with her brother, and they both can affirm the bone popping, transformation, hair growing, bleeding gums. She will report the yellow eyes, which the brother could not see from the angle he was at. But the fact that he can go, yeah, that man transformed into a wolf, is enough to affirm her side of the story.
Absolutely.
The fact that he doesn't want to talk about it, and only just recently affirmed it for her and said, no, I hate this memory, I don't want to talk about it at all, is something I'm sure a lot of people suffer from. They have an experience like this with a Dogman or a Sasquatch or whatever. They don't want to be called crazy. Because that's what she was called whenever she brought it up to anyone close to her. And that's why she stopped sharing the story. Until, of course, Linda Godfrey brought up the Dogman, made the Beast of Bray Road popular, started reporting and researching and getting people to reach out to her. And it was at a point where this woman, the witness, felt comfortable enough to make a vaguely anonymous report and reached out to Linda for correspondence and was able to get the brother involved just as a backup witness as well.
That's good. That's really, really good. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that individuals like Linda and other like fantastic people that are involved in these cryptid communities, and they create these platforms or these safe havens for people that feel isolated and alone. They can come forward, they can remain anonymous, but they can share their story, and just even by just putting their story out and just venting it, makes a huge difference, I imagine. And it can just be so relieving on like their mental health, everything like that. Especially like you said, you're being bullied and even families disowning you for this kind of a thing. Like, oh, it's
Exactly.
jumbo.
And when it comes to the report itself, I mean, they made it anonymously. They don't get anything out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And Linda Godfrey, she was a researcher. She loved this kind of stuff. But the amount of money you make from something like a book of reports like this, that wasn't going to go to any of the witnesses. Or maybe it did, I don't know. But the point of it being is it wasn't for 15 minutes of fame. To make a report like this is to contribute to that audience that has seen these things. People that have already had an experience, to share this information with others that have seen a dogman or a werewolf. It wasn't to put it out there and say, well, this exists. Because you don't want to sound crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But with people that have seen the same thing, it's a safe space for them to say, okay, yeah, this is what I saw. This is what happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being on the other side of it like this, there's so many possibilities. There's so many things. And it really comes down to it. These people are either honest and saying what they remember and talking about their experiences, or they're lying. And there's a lot of reports that don't result in 15 minutes of fame. We're talking about it right now, but we're not referring to them. We don't know their names.
Mm-hmm.
They're not getting any credit for it.
No. Yeah,
People
they wanna
post
remain
fictional
anonymous.
stories online and say they're fictional, but the amount of Bigfoot and Dogman reports are insane.
Mm-hmm.
These are people that have seen something.
Yeah. Like, again, you could have 99.9% of sightings and encounters, and all you need is that just 0.01% chance. And this could very well be that 0.01% chance. I have a question for you as this like story is closing out. Now, let's say your children have this experience. They come back to you at the laundromat, and you are the parent that is present in the situation. In this point of time as well, do you go and check and see what's going on? Or I guess like, yeah, okay, let me start that over again. So you're in this point of time, because I can't remember which point of like which date you listed this event occurring at, but you're in this point of time and your kids come back and you aren't fully well versed in like cryptids, all that kind of stuff. You're just standard kind of state of mind, society, everything. Kids come to you, they have this experience. What do? Do you go and investigate?
At that point, if I wasn't well versed in cryptids and stuff like that, I'd be a different parent. I'd probably be a little bit more dismissive. But if I had the opportunity to investigate something like this, because that's just the way I am, I wouldn't want to send my kids right back into hell that they just crawled out of. I'd hope to have Megan with me, for instance, and be like, okay, watch the kids. I want to go take a look. We'll go look at the carport or whatever, the stall. I'd go look at it. You know, I'd want to find their Nerf ball because it'd be like, oh, that's an expensive toy I just bought. I don't want to waste my money.
Well, that's the kicker. Like, I'd be the same. I'd want to go look. I'd want to just see if there's like footprints or see if there's anything lying around. Like, if this thing broke out of its clothes, there must be some clothing on the ground or something. Like, there must be something that was left around there. But that being said, I'm just glad that they both got out safely, and I think it's very interesting that there was actually like a physical grab on the girl's leg that the brother reiterated and thought, no, there was something did grab her leg like that. Because if a regular human grabs a leg, you have to put a lot of force on there to really show like a bruise or a claw or something like that. Like it's humans don't have that kind of like grab, right? Like a creature, that's very different.
Yeah, yes and no. Children are very fragile. I say this as a proud parent.
Mm-hmm.
I love my son and I'll give him many, many hugs. And there are definitely times where if you grab his arm or something like that, you put the littlest bit of pressure on him, you go, ow, ow, ow. And his skin could be like a little bit red. And you go, oh, wow. You know, like you don't realize the difference of strength that an adult has versus a tiny child with
That's
very
true.
thin skin.
That's true. And yeah, you said she was 7 years old actually as well. Yeah. I'm just glad they got out. That's brutal.
And now I sound like a terrible parent.
No, I think I think that's a fair thing to say. Because like when you're a new parent, I don't know my own strength. Like I think I can gauge it pretty well when I'm out in the real world, but I'm not interacting with like a kid left, right, and center where I'm like high five and all that kind of stuff.
There's definitely a point where you have a baby and you are so fragile and careful with them, and then they grow up to be a little toddler, and you go, there's a sudden realization of, oh, I can't just barely touch my child anymore. They slip out. It's like butter. So you go to grab their hand or something, or no, don't touch that, and you pull them and you go, oh, now I'm using too much strength. What's the right amount of strength?
Yeah. I don't think there's nothing horrible about that. It's just one of the learning curves of being a parent. That's all
It does
is.
become a parent.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I don't have anything else to add on top of that, unless you have anything else to throw in there before we exit.
Take us away, Taylor.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into this episode of Cryptid Clues. We will be back soon with more content. Reuben's got a special possible surprise coming up your way here. They'll be dropping on the feed soon. And yeah, just make sure you stay safe and have a very happy, Merry Christmas holidays, whatever you be celebrating. Good on you. And we'll be back next Monday with some more content for you. So again, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, Patreon, ad-free, early exclusive episodes available there. And you can also reach us directly with our email, cryptidclues@gmail.com. So until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.